Welcome, everyone, to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. I'm your host, Coach Justin. I'm here with Coach Katie. And today we're going to be talking about training plans prescribed in minutes versus miles. This is something that I've seen a lot on social media and interactions that I've had with various athletes, where there is a fascination with doing their training plans absolutely in miles. Especially for new runners. You find this in these template training plans that are out there on the internet as well. Everything is done in miles, but part of me has the argument that, well, maybe doing a training plan in miles may not be appropriate for a brand new runner, where it would be appropriate for an experienced runner building for a marathon. I think that there are pros and cons to each method, and I think ultimately it comes down to one question that you have to answer for yourself, or your coach has to answer for you, and is, are you trying to control workload, or are we trying to measure distance? I think that boils the conversation down to a pretty simple statement, and we are going to pick apart some of the pros and cons to each method. As we've talked about in previous episodes, I do training plans in minutes, where Katie does her training plans in miles. We've had this conversation many times in various episodes and offline as well. And so we thought that we would just kind of bring you a more well-formed argument for both, and let you be the decider on what is appropriate for you. Katie, do we want to start with the pros and cons for mileage-based training plans, or do we want to start with a minutes-based? What do you think? Let's go miles.
Yeah, okay, we can do that. I don't know if you want to start, or do you want me to say a few things, because I'm the one that does most of my training.
Yeah,
in
why
miles,
don't
yeah.
you go ahead and you lead this conversation, and we'll chime in together. So
I mean, I think it kind of depends a little bit on the runner and kind of the experience they have. So this is strictly for like a runner, not necessarily for. I think it might be different for like someone training for a triathlon, so we can kind of specify that what might be better for something like a marathon versus like a triathlon. But for marathon, I do think it's because it's people are generally, like, especially if they've been running for a while, an experienced marathoner, just more familiar with miles, and so they're comfortable with that. I think there sometimes might be like a little bit of pushback from someone I would be working with who maybe has been a runner for a little while to switch over. So I generally tend to. It's interesting because I use Training Peaks, so I often put in both a time and a mile like goal in there, if that makes sense. So it's not as though there is no consideration for time at all. And I am looking at it if it's taking a significant more time than I've put on there for that person to get the miles I've prescribed, or, because I'm generally getting a bit of an idea of their pace as I'm working with them and kind of how long it's taking them. So it's not as though I'm only doing one exclusively, but I do focus more on miles. And I think most runners, that's just what a lot of runners focus on, having that pushback from somebody. If I was like, I don't even want you to think about it, I just want you to do this amount of minutes, there's that sort of like, well, how many miles, or what's my pace, and that kind of that type of questioning. So I just tend to put in the mileage goals generally, not always, but generally, especially for someone in which I know kind of their pace that I want them to go for that run, and the miles I want them to complete. I think it's useful for like the more race specific, like a marathon specific preparation. I think it can be useful to know mileage and having people kind of have an idea of how long, or like the miles are running and how long it's taking them to complete it. So both, but the mileage piece in that sense, I think is helpful for like a marathon, to know somebody can complete the mileage, but also to have that confidence of, okay, I'm running this certain amount of mileage, and being able to psychologically be prepared for the race. To estimate weekly volume, it depends, because again, like we'll kind of get into this, what might be the issues with mileage is certain runs are gonna be slower and certain runs are gonna be faster, and if you're balancing it right, like, whatever time it's taking you to run, like, let's say you were to run 70 miles, if you're balancing everything right as a coach and having, like, the more intense miles be balanced by the easy miles, it should always generally be close to a certain time, you know what I mean? Like, you're not if
Yeah.
I'm not doing it right and there's a lot of intensity, like, sometimes I'm thinking of it like you're balancing all those easy runs with the hard runs, so at the end of the week, it's probably really close to a certain time, and it probably won't fluctuate all that much if you're doing it correctly. Is there a big difference, really? I don't know, we can talk about that, but it might be easier to estimate volume in terms of mileage, but volume could also be measured in terms of minutes. So, and it's just, I think like I said, it's popular amongst marathoners and experienced runners. So I just think that's what most runners kind of tend to think in. Everyone asks, "What's your mileage?" So it's just like, "What miles are you running? How many miles a week are you running?" These are questions that runners tend to ask themselves, and so there's a lot of things are being compared against miles, or how many miles are you running? What's your volume in terms of miles? So to get runners to kind of think differently in terms of minutes might be a little bit challenging, I think, especially for experienced
Okay.
runners. Now, newer runners, I actually think might benefit from more of a minutes-based approach, but there's probably some downside. I mean, can you think of any benefits more than that? I'm like, what do you have on your I mean, those are big.
Yeah, those pretty much
Yeah.
summarize the
There's not
pros
like
that
a
I
ton of
had
pros. It's not like
for this.
it's like astronomical like pros. In fact, I think there might be more pros to like minutes based, like in terms of w- w- the way you can estimate volume a little better and making sure someone's not overloading, not volume, but maybe like doing too much work because maybe there are certain things that are causing them
Yeah.
to slow down for some reason. I think where mileage can be a bit of an issue, and we'll go into this too, and this is where maybe this is the benefit of the minutes based approach, is where, like I was talking to you before, where let's this example of somebody who's running 70 miles a week or 60 to, somewhere like that, 60 to 70 miles a week in preparation for their marathon. And then they're used to that. Like, that's my max volume that I do for my marathon. I'm going to do a trail ultra, right? And I'm going to train, and it's going to be a really hilly one in Colorado somewhere. And now they're going out to the trails, and their goal is they're thinking this is the mileage I need to do. And now their terrain has completely changed, and the running on a hilly terrain on the trails is going to be slower. So, like, 10, 20 miles of running in the mountains on the trails could be hours. And so if
Yeah.
you're still trying to hit that 70 miles, all of a sudden you've gone from maybe 10 hours a week to 15, and you're putting a lot more load. That could be easily a recipe for injury without even realizing it. I mean, obviously you're probably realizing you're taking long, but if you're not actually looking at the minutes and how long it's taking to run that 70 miles, it could have a significantly negative impact on you if you don't do it,
Right.
slowly. If you don't sort of do, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't do 70. I'll start with a lower mileage and then work up, right? Um,
Yeah.
so that's one thing. I think also we'll talk about things like just things that slow you down, right? So if you have an 8-mile run and it usually takes you maybe, I don't know, an hour 15 or something, but now you have a hot day or it's really windy. Like, that's happened to me a lot here in Colorado. We have a lot of wind. And I mean, oftentimes I'm running part of it into the wind and then part of it again, so it might even out. But if you have like a really windy day or something that just causing you to slow down, then maybe now that's taking you an hour and a half. So if you're not
Hmm.
accounting for that, that could be something. And obviously, someone that's an hour somebody could run 9 miles. Like, a fast runner might be able to do 9 miles in an hour, and somebody who's newer to running and just starting and is just maybe doing run walk or something, is now that's maybe 5 miles for that runner. And so
Hmm.
it's a very different, right? So if I gave that 9 miles, that newer runner, the nine, that would maybe take them almost 2 hours to complete or an hour and a half or more.
Yeah.
And that's a lot more volume for that person. So these are things I think, we're going to dive into, but I think I think it gets a little bit complicated because I almost argue people should be paying attention to both, but if we had to sort of pick one or the other, but I think, yeah, those are my sort of the benefits of mileage. But I just think it comes down to like preference a lot, like the way marathoners and runners think. It's mostly just mileage, and so
Hmm.
convincing a marathoner or a runner to change their way of doing that and um, think of it in minutes might be a challenge in itself. Personally, I know for me it might be. 'Cause I don't know, it's like a psychological thing, right? You're just thinking I mean, it's not like, "Oh, this is the amount of mileage." You hear pros talking about it all the time, like, if I listen to YouTube videos, which for some reason I like to watch YouTube videos of some of the more elite athletes, but they talk about hitting at their 130 miles a week, which is mostly not going to be feasible for most people who aren't elite, but they're thinking, a lot of elites are talking in mileage. I don't ever hear any of them saying, "Oh, I've I've ran 15 hours, this week." It's always mileage. So I think that's just kind of something, whether that's good or bad or the way it should be or shouldn't be, that's just kind of the way runners tend to think and the way I guess the culture tends to be. So that's probably why I just do most of my training plans for people in mileage because it's maybe not the right way always, but it's kind of the way it is for a lot of runners. I'd like to hear your thoughts.
The one question that I've got for you, though, is for training plans that are prescribed in minutes, how do you prescribe the fueling plan to go with those runs?
Oh, you mean
Because
in minutes or in mileage?
in mileage, so
Oh,
if you do a training plan that's in miles,
mhm.
how do you advise the athlete to execute a nutrition strategy for that run that is in miles?
I mean, I think that's where it's interesting because this is where now I'm thinking about it. I'm like, well, I don't actually always just think in miles because for most of my athletes I'm working with, I'm aware of how long that might take them. I know it's going to give or take a little bit depending on, maybe how they feel that day or what the weather's like. But as I'm getting to know my runners, I'm kind of getting to know their paces and where they're at. So if I'm prescribing a 15-mile run, I might know approximately that might take that person an hour 50 to 2 hours and 10. So I'm giving them a fueling plan for like a 2 hour, per hour. And it's per hour. It's still per hour. It's not like, so that's where it gets
Okay.
interesting because my fueling plans that I provide are per a minute based. They're not necessarily always mileage based. So it's usually, unless it's like an elite marathoner who maybe has like in their marathon, they know they have a table with the fueling on it
Hmm.
every 5K, then that's more mileage based. That's just because of that's the way it's scheduled out. But for most of us have to carry our own, I'm maybe doing it every 20 minutes. I want you to, so that's where it is
Hmm.
interesting because I don't do those fueling plans by miles usually. It's usually by minutes. So that's
Okay.
yeah, it's like you're out there. So at 20 minutes, I mean, no matter where you are, whether you're, 2 miles in or you're 3 miles or more into your run. So wherever you are at that 20 minutes, you still would be fueling. Because if I tell somebody that is maybe new to running and their pace is like a 12 minute mile to fuel every 3 miles, now they're not fueling until like 30 some odd minutes in.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So I as
It
much
does.
as I
Yeah.
do mileage, I actually, now that I'm talking about it, a lot of what I recommend is minutes based. So it's a combination of both that I am working with people in some aspect of both. I don't think I ever just consider only mileage. So,
So
yeah.
if you give an athlete a run that's in miles, say today's long run is 10 miles, and you give them advice on the nutrition strategies, like, okay, so these are the carbs that we want to hit per hour, And how do you control for the degradation of pace as the run gets longer and longer? So the pace that they may run the first 45 minutes may be significantly easier or better than the next 45 minutes and the following 45 minutes. So as we experience the cardiac drift, I mean, our body starts to kind of overheat a little bit, and so you might need to increase that nutrition intake, and the subsequent miles are taking you longer to accumulate. So is that one of the reasons why that you don't do nutrition plans and miles, just because of that phenomenon?
Yeah, I think it's just because if somebody is out there longer, like 20 minutes longer, I want them to continue fueling at that schedule. So it's easier to do it in minutes. I mean, ideally, people wouldn't be slowing down that much. Like, I mean, that happens, right? We have those days where, but that's another discussion maybe of consistency with your pacing strategy because
Mm.
generally, I mean, in my long runs, the way I structure them, I'm starting out easier, warming into it, and then my later miles are generally faster. And I'm trying to finish faster. Sometimes they're just as fast as when I started. Because in my marathon, I don't want that to happen where I slow down that. I mean, it happens.
Right.
Marathons are traditionally very, it's like those last 6 miles that you're just kind of hanging on. And it's very common to slow down slightly. Like that's a common thing that happens. But the less you can slow down those final 6 miles, the better you're going to do. So one of the things I really work with people is if that's happening, then there's a discussion about them starting out too fast, pacing wise
Okay.
in their long run. So, what I'd rather them do is start out almost progress it slowly, like slowly get a little bit faster and faster, and then really finish strong, even if it's uncomfortable, because they want to learn what that's like in the marathon. So, hopefully, that's not happening. But I think prescribing it minute based for fueling kind of covers that in case. I mean, if someone's suffering that bad, hopefully I've had a discussion with them prior to that long run. Like, if you get to mile 18 and you're struggling, don't finish, you know? So it's not always like I try when I'm working with people to be like, this is the mileage I'm prescribing, but I also want you to realize that if you don't feel good, because runners are so obsessive about mileage, they feel like you have to push yourself to hit that, and in a long run for like a marathon, if I do prescribe a 20-mile run, that's probably one of the times where I do also look at out like minutes because I might say, I want you to hit this or 3 hours. Like if you go to 3 hours and you haven't hit 20, you need to stop. Or if it's
Yeah.
almost 20, you can go like a few minutes over, but don't keep going and going until you're now running almost 4 hours to hit that 20 miles. And you're putting a lot of, that's just a lot of wear and tear. So it's that discussion of like, it's okay if you're 18 miles in, you're suffering, it's just not going well, you got 18 miles, stop there. So
Okay.
it's when I'm working with athletes, it's a lot of discussion about pace and what I'm wanting them to achieve in that workout. And if the workout's not going the way it is, or they're substantially slow, like, or the way I want it to be, I mean, or it's substantially slowing down, or you hit 3 hours and you're only at 19 miles or something, and you're really suffering a bit, it don't don't need to go an extra mile. It's really not going 20 miles is like a psychological thing for many runners. It's like
Yeah.
19 is fine. Just because you hit 20 doesn't mean magically now you're going to be able to complete the marathon and it's going to go great. Like, there's nothing really magical exactly about 20. That's just, again, kind of a psychological thing. So it's a lot of discussion with my athletes. So I do bring up minutes, honestly, sometimes, especially in those longer runs. And I do kind of give almost like leeway to it. Like, this is the mileage, but maybe it's somewhere between 18 and 20. And I want you to stop when you start to really suffer, or like you're slowing down so much and it's not going to be worth it. Like your
Yeah.
pace is slowing, you're starting to, like, your whole form is just starting to go out the window. It's not worth those extra 2 miles because the risk is not worth the benefit. So a lot of
Right.
times for me, it's at having those types of discussions so that my athletes know, and that kind of takes away maybe that pressure for them too, to be like, I have to hit this, exact mileage, because I do think that's an obsessive thing that runners have. We talked about running in circles in the parking lot to hit a certain
Yeah.
mile. I mean, that could happen with minutes too, and I'm not saying I'm not guilty of that, like, 'cause I am, but it's just like a funny phenomenon with runners. Like, I'm only at like 7.8. I'm gonna go run like point 0.2, and they're doing like circles or running down and back, in the parking lot or
Yeah.
wherever. And I want to have that discussion with my athletes that they don't need to be so obsessive.
So let's also
Makes
bring
sense.
up a scenario that I think is relevant. And if you have an athlete that comes to you and they want to do an early season marathon, you may be more comfortable to have those 20-mile runs in that training plan just because of the time of year that it
Maybe
is and
weather
the
is cooler,
impact
yeah.
the impact of the environment on the body might be a little bit more conducive to having those types of runs in the training plan. Now, let's say that same athlete wants to come and do a similar marathon, but now it's in the middle of the summer. How do you make adjustments to the training plan based on the time of year that the race is? And how do you convince the runner or encourage the runner to not be so tied to, oh, I have to get these 20 mile, I have to get the 20-mile run, I have to get the 18, I have to get the 22, knowing full well that the draw that it would have on the body to do that kind of effort, the duration that it would take, and the environment in which they have to do it in would dig such a hole that it's hard for them to recover from. Do you make those accommodations in training plans that you do that would be in miles based on the time of year?
Yeah, I think like based on the time of year, again, I think it would be a similar thing. There would be like a cutoff of or some sort of range I would give, because yeah, we do have to account for the heat. Obviously, I think I'm having a discussion of like, I think the pace expectations have to be discussed, whether you're doing minutes or, because you have to face it, like people are still looking at their pace. So whether
Yeah.
you're doing minutes or mileage, I think having that discussion of, okay, I mean, there are, I think, online calculators you can find that take like your pace that you're trying to run and calculate like based off of dew point, like how much you need to shift that pace. And I found that actually very helpful. And sometimes I'll share that with people because it almost takes that worry off of my, away of like, oh, I'm supposed to hit this pace. I'm supposed to do some marathon pace work in my 20 miler. Like tomorrow I have a 20 miler and I'm supposed to do marathon pace work. But if it's hot, like then I know, okay, well, I'm going to adjust that about 10 seconds because it's warm. And then I also know that it's going to slow down my whole run also. So like I still might aim for 20 miles, but again, I might have like a cutoff. Or if I get to 18 and I've done a lot of that pace work and I felt like my workout's been really good, but I'm just starting to feel like things are deteriorating, giving me the permission to say, hey, I've already I've already done several long runs, getting to again that psychological piece of, oh, I have to hit that last 20 miler and otherwise my marathon's not going to be successful. But I think it is having those pace based discussions with athletes and then adjusting. So if someone's like, for me, it's like even if I adjusted my pace expectations a little bit, I think within 3 hours I could still complete that. So it's more of like, how am I feeling discussion of like, is this heat really destroying me? And despite my efforts to eat and take in fluids, I just am not able to complete 20 miles because the risk of pushing myself is not worth it. Then I have to, realize that. But I can still complete that in 3 hours, maybe less, depending. But if I have an athlete that's maybe their paces now are going to be adjusted so much that they're probably not going to be able to complete that amount, within that 3 hours because it's so hot out, like then it's like we're going to adjust the mileage a little bit. So it's like you're
Yeah.
doing 16 miles or 18 miles instead of 20, but the effort you're putting in is equal to the load is equal to a 20-mile run because it's Yeah, I mean, it's hard, like, people don't understand that, and I think that's where there has to be discussion, but especially if you're like, let's say you're training for, like, August, September for, like, an October marathon, so it's not really like a summer
Mhm.
marathon, but you're training for, like, Chicago, but your training is in the heat.
Yep.
Uh, you're that heat is, the load you're doing, the workload you're doing at 16 or 18 might be equal to 20. It's just trying to get people to
Right.
think
Yeah.
about it that way
Hmm.
is hard because they're like, I got it. I think again, it's that obsessiveness of I've got to hit 20. I've heard I had to do 20. And it's, I think then that's where the role of the coach comes in. And that's why I think sometimes people really benefit from a coach because it's like reminding people and kind of being that like mentor of yeah, actually you'll be fine because it's so warm out and all of like all the adaptation you're getting from the heat and training in the heat that's actually benefiting you and it's like the same amount of workload really as like doing a 20-mile run. Your body doesn't know the difference. The only thing that's
Right.
different is the mileage. So that's
Yeah.
again where I think so, yeah, I mean, I guess what you're to answer to your question is I maybe adjust the mileage goal down a little bit to account for the heat. So maybe their longest long run isn't going to be 20 because that's just too much time out in the heat. So,
Hmm.
but then you have to convince people that it's okay. You're getting the same amount of workload. Your body doesn't know the difference. The body doesn't know you did 20. You know what I mean? Like it's hard for people to come out of that sort of obsessive mileage thought framework that they've kind of always and I am guilty of that. Absolutely guilty myself. Like I can give an example for me when I did that half marathon after I was sick and I was supposed to do a warm up and a cool down and I was supposed to hit 20 miles that day and it was warm and I'm doing my cool down and I hit like 19 and I'm like I'm done. This is not I can tell my body like I'm already overdoing it. I can tell my
Hmm.
body is starting to break down a little bit. I can't run any faster than this. It's slowing down. I'm like, I'm done. I hit 19 and that's where I was and it was supposed to be 20. But I guarantee you like with the heat and the fact that I was coming back like the load on my body was probably close to 20 if not more in terms of
Yeah.
like what my body was having to the workload. So, I was 19. Like big deal, right? Like it's doesn't like look like 20 on my training plan or something or on Strava, but nobody actually really cares because I think I also recorded that like warm up and cool down separately. So it's not like anyone's looking, but it's just that mental
Yeah.
mindset of having to like let go and be like, it's going to be fine, like no one, that extra mile isn't somehow magical. So
Yeah. I think this is an important distinction that new runners have to reconcile.
mhm.
And they go and they find these training plans that are on the internet, or they go to ChatGPT and have some kind of AI based platform that provides them a training plan, but they may not have the insight to know or to recognize that adjustments are needed. They're just like, oh, I have to hit this, I have to hit this. But having enough experience to know the cumulative stress score that's going to be tied to that workout is going to be equivalent, if not greater, than if you ran more miles under better conditions. And Training Peaks, when it comes up with its stress score, it just takes into account that one workout, like what was the stress
Oh, right.
score of that one session. But I argue, and this is one of the reasons that I don't like Training Peaks score, is that it doesn't take into account the fatigue that you had already accumulated before that session and what is coming up next.
Next, right.
So it
Yeah.
just tells you how much that particular run took out of you, but it does not take into account, hey, I did a tempo session yesterday. I did hill repeats the day before. I had an easy run, but that easy run is still maybe not enough as easy to really shed very much fatigue at all. It just allows me to deload and not maybe accumulate a significant uh, more fatigue,
Mhm.
but it may just be enough to maintain the status quo. So that's why I argue sometimes is that recovery runs, when I'm working with an athlete, I'm less likely to prescribe recovery runs because the athletes that I do tend to work with are maybe a little bit on the newer side. And so we're really kind of like building that aerobic foundation, and the stress that they accumulate just running in general, regardless of whether this is zone 2, whether these are tempo intervals, race pace intervals, it doesn't matter. I have found that recovery runs are still stress inducing runs. So if you think that, well, most of my running is still in zone 2, you have to understand that zone 2 is still an aerobic building activity, and there's still stress that is induced. You're still making contact with the ground. Impact on the body from each foot strike can be anywhere from 3 to 5 times your body weight. So just because you're running easier doesn't negate the stress that the body has to absorb from that foot strike. So that's why I've kind of moved away from the whole recovery run mentality, and do tend to either do lesser impact activities for recovery for this very reason. And it's this accumulated stress that really is hard to quantify, it's hard to measure, and it's really hard for new athletes to understand, especially if they don't have somebody that they can rely on to answer these types of questions or even be preemptive with it. Because all that new athlete knows is that, I got this training plan from Runner's World magazine. It gave me my marathon build. I'm doing this in like 14 to 16 weeks of a marathon build. But they don't know that, this person lives in Florida, and their marathon is right at the end of summer, which means that all of their training is going to take place in the heat, in the humidity, versus somebody who maybe lives in more of a temperate climate, where they don't have that kind of exposure. It's the same training plan, but they don't have that understanding. It's like, okay, I need to adjust this. And that's why I do tend to like minutes-based training plans a lot better than mileage-based. But I understand the argument, and I understand that there is, to a certain level, a need to satiate the insecurities. And this is something that I wanted to bring up a little bit when we talk about mileage-based training plans, is that I think that there's a certain level of insecurity for new runners, not necessarily experienced runners, to be quote unquote certain that they can cover the distance. And they feel that, if I can get this 20 to 22 miles in, I should be comfortable. But I've had a lot of conversations with athletes where they're not even comfortable having that kind of mileage. They want higher. They want more of a certainty, more of a guarantee that they can cover 26.2 miles.
So you're saying they're like asking for like, I want to do 20, like a 26
yes,
mile.
they want to know that they can cover the distance on race day, rather than trusting the process that gets them there, and say, okay, if you've tapered correctly, just because we didn't cover 26 miles doesn't mean that you can't do it today and do it well.
Right.
So I think that's one of the pitfalls of using mileage-based training plans, is because I think this fuels this insecurity in new runners to really just focus on miles all the time. And I have a hard time with that.
All the races are in miles, right?
Yeah, that's
so I think
true.
that's part of it, is like a 5K is, 5K, 3.1, 10K is double that. And then you have the half marathon, and the marathon, is 26 miles. And yeah, I think that's part of it, is like, I don't know, like, I guess you can't really, I guess you could do a race that's like 3 hours, whoever runs furthest, and I don't know, but that wouldn't probably happen. I don't know how you would do that. But yeah, I think that's probably part of it. And then I do think for newer runners, yeah, it's like they're worried. It's a long ways to go, like 26 miles.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand it, because it's, even now I realize this will be like my 11th marathon, but I've done longer races. I've done some ultra stuff, and, tons and tons of half marathons. But I get it even now, thinking about it, in 3 weeks I have grandmas, and I'm like 26 miles. Oh, like, why did I what am I thinking?
Yeah.
But I've done, that many of them, and I understand the process, and I understand, like, it's gonna be enough because I've done it. But I think for someone new, there can be that, well, what if I can't complete that distance. And that's why even when you look online at a lot of the standard training plans that you find, I don't think I've ever seen one that includes a 26-mile run or
Yeah.
anything
No.
really generally the highest for like an advanced runner, like, because sometimes the plans are in like beginner, moderate, and advanced. Like the
Hmm.
advanced plans might have 22. But I think some of
Yeah.
that, honestly, now that I'm thinking about it, is probably being fueled by, again, this comparison of like newer runners watching because now, we have Instagram and like I say, I like to watch some of the elite runners and their videos they put out because I'm just curious. Mostly because I'm just curious what they're doing and I don't ever
Yeah.
emulate usually, or I'm not like, oh, like so and so ran 27 miles, but I do remember hearing one of the female, oh, I don't remember who it was, saying something about running a 27-mile run and her lead
Yeah.
up to one like Boston, or I don't know. I wish I could think of who it was. I just don't want to misspeak and provide the wrong runner. But I'm wondering if maybe part of that is because people are consuming this information because it is fascinating to watch what the elites are doing. But we don't need to emulate them because they are on a
Right.
league like above us in their talent and ability. Like most people starting and running are not going to be that particular runner probably ran that 27 miles in 3 hours. But
Yeah.
maybe. But if it's maybe a little longer than that, but it was an elite, so I'm assuming her best marathon time is like 2:30 for 26. So she's probably slowed down a little bit, but it may still be within close to that 3-hour window. So for that particular person, 3 hours or 27 miles may be okay, right? I think that's probably what's fueling that, honestly, I wonder a little bit because you do have this, comparison now we can see what elite runners are doing more and more because they're posting about it, and I think a new runner coming in is probably watching that because, yeah, elite runners have a lot of followers, and so then they're thinking, "Oh, well, so and so is running 27," and then there's this, like, uncertainty about the distance, and they're probably thinking, "I need to run at least 26 to be able to know I can complete
Yeah.
26." It's like, well, the reason you're training for the marathon is so you can, because if you do 26 before you run the marathon, I don't
You've
know,
already ran the
you've
marathon.
already like,
So,
in the amount of stress that is on your body, you're not doing yourself any favor. Your marathon isn't your actual marathon probably isn't going to go great because you've already ran the marathon. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like, it's not making any sense, to do that, but I think I understand. I just hope that these people that are sort of saying that or worrying about that would hopefully find a coach or somebody who could help guide them that has the experience to know,
Mhm.
yeah, to have that discussion with this individual because that could just totally ruin their actual marathon. That would be,
Yeah.
they might end up injured, but they are also the load of that. I mean, it takes me when I do a marathon like at least a couple weeks to actually, if not longer, to be anywhere back to my normal. Of course, I'm running that as fast as I can for 26 miles, and that's not something I'm doing in training.
Yeah, there's one more distinction that I'd like to make, and this is something that I've seen quite a bit in conversations online and conversations that I've had with people. When you have a new runner who's kind of just getting started, and they make this commitment, and they're just like, okay, I've said, well, what's your weekly volume? If they ask a particular question, I say, well, what's the weekly volume? And they're like, I run 3 5Ks a week, and then my long run is a 10K. So what I find to be fascinating is that the more conversations that I have, the more I see those particular responses. Very, very specific. Like I run 5Ks and 10K. That's my training volume.
Mhm.
And I'm kind of curious on why there seems to be this fascination to settle at the 5K distance and the 10K distance. Do we think that it's because there are 5K and 10K races, and that's just what they that's it's just easier for them to think about it that way?
Hmm.
Or if they're talking to people, it's easier for them to communicate what their mileage is versus saying something like, well, my weekly runs or anywhere between 2 miles to 3 miles. My long run can be anywhere between 5 and 7, something like that, where they're not all the runs are exactly the same, but they seem to focus really on those two particular distances. And it's the 5K, the 10K. And I've even seen people just like, oh, I do 5Ks during the week. I have another 10K during the week. And then my long run is like 10 to 12 miles. I'm just like, good grief.
Are they running these all?
I think these are runners where they're not training, they're running for fitness.
Oh, okay.
And I think that seems to be a common denominator with these types of conversations, that these are people that are just running to run. They're not necessarily training something, or they're not interested in performance. They just seem to be interested in just ticking off miles and in terms of using that as an instrument for their level of fitness. But have you come across very many conversations where people, that seems to be the response, where these very specific run denominations of 5K and 10K?
Not really. I wonder if it's just because the races, 5K is such a common race distance. So maybe but I'm like, are these same people going out every day and trying to run that 5K faster than the last one? Like, how is their training?
I don't think
What are they
so.
doing?
I think that they're just going out and just
Oh, they're
looking
running.
to cover the distance.
I gotta cover like a 5K every day or something.
Yes.
Interesting. Yeah. I think that's just like maybe that's like a fad. So I wonder if that comes from, if we were to like really dig in, if that comes from like some sort of influencer type situation, of like, I run a 5K every day. You know what I mean? Like, I kind of wonder where that's coming from, or if it's, because that's something I really come across, but maybe there is some sort of fad happening because I know, there's a lot of so-called running influencers, and I'm just weird. I would be interesting to dig into that, of like, oh, so and so runs, like, this one influencer runs like 5K every day, and then they do a 10K, and it's coming from something like that, or is it because of the race distances happen to be that way? It's just interesting to me because I don't understand it. I'm like, just run 3 miles, and then you can run 4, you could run 5, you could run 2. You don't have to do a 5K. You could do 3 miles. Does it have to be 3.1? Can it just be 3? Like, I don't know. That's interesting to me. When I'm running, I never think of it like I did every once in a while I'll finish like a 3-mile run and it'll be around 3.1, but it's not like I tried to hit that. You know what I mean? I'm like, it's just that I don't know. I'm curious where that might be coming from, or if it's just this, people are they're new to running, or they're trying to run for fitness, and they're just trying to kind of have a specific goal, and they've kind of set it at these distances that are just common race distances, to be able to kind of compare it week to week and have an actual set distance. But it is like, well, why? Just in my thought, I'm like, does it have to be specifically this amount? I don't know. That is weird.
And I can't figure out why that is. And then I talked to him, and I was like, okay, well, have you ever thought about the distribution of your weekly volume? And I know we've talked about this before on a previous episode, on how, we split up, whether it be total miles or total minutes for a week, and how we divide those up across multiple runs. It's like they make all the runs the same distance or the same duration during the week, and then some arbitrary like long run.
Because I do think, like, throughout the week, it makes sense to maybe have like different distances, like having some maybe shorter distance, and then maybe more of a moderate distance, and then obviously some difference in intensity, but depending on the runner. But I don't know, if you're just running to run, maybe it's just easier to sort of hit a certain amount. And that's okay. I guess for me, it's like, okay, that's fine. If that's your goal, is just fitness generally, then do whatever you need to do. That might not get you better, you maybe initially, but if you're going to hit a point where you're not going to get much better at running, or faster, or improve. But if that's all you're looking to do, then I don't know if I have a problem with it. It's just more like, if someone comes to me and they're like, this is what I'm doing, but I want to get better at a 5K or a 10K, I want to improve my time, then I'm going to be like, yeah, that's probably not going to work that great for you. So let's switch it up, like let's kind of come away from this weird obsession over 5K, 10K is a specific distance or these arbitrary numbers really, and like kind of actually set a plan that will work. Cause I don't think that doesn't make any sense. I don't think that kind of goal is going to really move the dial too much in fitness. I don't
Yeah,
know.
usually the reason for that conversation is that they've implemented this training plan and they're coming to me or they're seeking advice because they're now hurt.
Oh, yeah.
And
Okay. No, that
so,
makes sense.
that's
But I'm
really
wondering, are they
kind
like, that's why I
of
was like, are
where
they
that
doing this
conversation started.
5K like every time? Like I've run into people who are like, I go out and I do like, yeah, that kind of thing. Like I'm doing a 5K 3 times a week. And every time they're going out, they're trying to run it like a 5K, like as
Yeah.
fast as they can every time. And I'm like, that is not going to work. That's a recipe for injury, burnout, but you aren't going to get any faster doing it that way. Like that's not going to help you out at all. You're just pounding, running as fast as you can 3 times a week, doing a 5K, trying to get better is not the way you improve. So that's a discussion. So that's why I was curious if it's people doing that sort of situation where they're like, okay, every time I run, I'm going to do 5K and I'm doing it as hard as I can. Because that's a different problem than I'm just
Yeah.
running 5K because I'm trying to hit the distance and I'm just going at some sort of arbitrary pace that doesn't faster. Because that would probably definitely get somebody injured if that's the case.
Well, a lot of times it's the new runners, so there
Mhm.
may not even be any intensity in it anyway. So
Yeah.
they're basically just kind of like, I don't want to say coming off of the couch, but they may be fit, but they're not run fit, and then they're starting to implement this. Oh, I got to run a 5K, 2 to 3 times a week, and then do a long run on the weekend,
Hmm.
and they just haven't built up to that. They haven't
Oh.
built up to the 5K regardless of
Oh,
intensity.
so they probably
That's
shouldn't even
that's
be
the
doing
point that
that.
I'm
Yeah.
trying to make is that,
I see.
don't be so fixated on
They
these.
shouldn't even
Yeah,
be there at the 5. They need to
right.
be doing like a
They're not at
2,
that point yet.
maybe a 5K,
Yes.
but a run walk or like a 2-mile run might be more appropriate. I get what you're saying. Oh, okay. I guess 1 or 2 miles isn't enough or something. I don't know. I don't know
I don't think
what's
it's brag worthy.
it's not like
I think
neither
that
is a
might be
5K.
a part
It's
of it.
not brag worthy. It's just interesting. I guess I don't understand.
Yeah.
Somebody will have to fill us in on that if they have any insights because I'm like kind of just as confused about that as maybe you are.
Yeah. So let's make the shift over now. I think we've talked pretty in depth about mileage based training plans
Yeah,
and kind of
let's
the
do the
pros and
minutes.
cons
Yeah.
from those. So let's shift over to minutes based. This is a method that I use, one that I really like, and it seems to work pretty well, not just for me, but for the athletes that I work with as well. I don't want to, I mean, I've used this method for runners as well as multi-sport athletes. And I could sense the pushback when I give a runner a training plan and it's all prescribed in minutes. I
Right.
can just feel the tension on the other
Yeah.
side of the phone call.
See,
It's like,
yeah, that's
what is this? Well, how many miles is that? I
right.
don't know. Whatever
That's what
miles
they're
you
gonna
get in
ask.
that time, that's the
I
mileage.
guarantee you every
So,
time. How many miles? Yeah.
yeah, but see, one of the things that I'm more focused on as a coach is I'm not interested in measuring miles. I'm really interested in controlling workload and managing stress. I think that this is really, I don't want to say more relevant for multi-sport athletes, but I do think that they do carry a unique level of stress and fatigue on their body that single sport athletes don't carry.
Mhm.
They do have more options that, if they're not able to get that run volume, let's say that we're training for a half Ironman or a full Ironman, and they should not, in my opinion, this is my opinion, they should not be putting in the same run volume that a single sport runner would be putting in
Mhm.
for the race of the same distance. So if I'm working with an athlete who's training for a half Ironman and we effectively have a half marathon at the end of the race, the volume that I give that athlete is not the same volume that I would give an athlete just training for a half marathon. There is a lot of benefit and carryover from the bike fitness that you build. You're still building the same cardiovascular engine. Are you as run fit? No, but you do have, if not better, an aerobic base than the runner does. One conversation that I had with an athlete that I've worked with for a really long time, and we were chatting about some of the races that he had coming up and looking back at some of the past performances. And he said that, I want to run in a triathlon like I do in just a normal run race. And I just had to look at him and just like, look, man, you're not a runner. You're a triathlete. It's different. It has to be different.
Mhm.
So thinking that you can come off of the bike after swimming and biking and be able to run a route like a runner would is unreasonable, in my opinion. There may be other coaches and other opinions out there which are fine, but the way that I manage fatigue for an athlete, that's the way that I've found it. It does not benefit them in terms of recovery, in terms of the quality of their run fitness. Is not the same level. So, that's where I tend to put my attention. And it's really hard when I have a runner who comes to me that wants to get into the sport of triathlon to break that mindset. We have to change how we look at ourselves and how we evaluate who it is that we are. It's like, okay, I'm glad you're a runner, but this is not a running sport. This is triathlon. So we have 3 disciplines that we're trying to master. And so we have to let go of all those preconceived notions. And I don't know if we've talked about this in other podcasts, but I know it's something that I've talked about before. And I think athletes do tend to pick these races based on their run experience. So I have a lot of runners that I would work with getting into the sport of triathlon. They're like, oh, I've run, bunches of half marathons and I've run, a couple marathons. So I'm going to start at the 70.3 because they know that they can cover a half marathon and they know how they feel after they do that. But what they don't know is how are they going to feel after swimming and cycling for the duration and distance that we had to cover. And I think that gets runners into races that they're kind of overreaching a little bit.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
So,
Yeah.
so
We talked a little bit
for
about that
me,
maybe with our run, like our triathlon, the marathon
yeah.
triathlon
So
episode, but yeah.
yeah, I like minutes because it allows me to control the training stress a little bit more. I'm able to say, hey, the body doesn't care, and nor does it know how many miles you've gone. It knows how long it's under stress. So trying to hit a particular mileage in order to satiate some kind of need that you have to meet the mileage really just opens the door to injury and overuse and setbacks and just overtraining. So what I do is I just tend to, it's like, look, this is the way that we're going to do it. We're going to be running for this number of hours each week. We're going to be cycling for this number of hours. The only one that I do distance-based is going to be swimming, just because, it's fairly easy. You're just going from one end of the pool to the other. The length of the pool is fixed. And it's non-impact, so I don't have to be all that concerned on a stress score for that. I do have to be a little cautious when doing swim workouts in distance-based. If the swimmer may not have very good form, even though it's a non-impact sport, there's still stress that the body is under, whether they're effectively using the correct muscles to swim or not. It's very easy to kind of get some tendons and ligaments heated up from smaller muscles having to carry the workload that bigger muscles should be doing. But just because it's non-weight bearing or it's non-impact doesn't mean that there isn't stress associated with it and fatigue that accumulates. So, I honestly don't care if, the athlete gets through 5, 6, 7 miles in the span of 60 minutes. That is what it is, because I know that if I give that workout to that athlete at a different time of year, that miles could be different. Or if I give them, if they pick a different route And I think one of the things that I've seen as a coach is with athletes who do distance-based training plans is they do tend to find easier routes to run in order to either make those miles easier, to make their pace a little bit faster. If I give you something in minutes, then I much prefer you do the harder route. You know, I much rather see less miles, but a harder run than you finding a flat route that's going to be perfect for you to where you can get higher mileage and a better pace. That doesn't impress me. And that's not something, I mean, I would tell them, look, well, this route is a pretty easy route. Whether this is synonymous with the type of course that we're training for, that would be different if, we're training for, Ironman Florida, the full Ironman, which is going to be a fairly flat route. But, then yeah, let's find some flat routes to run in order for you to really understand what it's going to feel like to have those same muscles engaged. There's no undulation in the roads. What it's going to feel like to have that same turnover all the time, just to kind of build that neuromuscular pathway to understand what it's going to feel like. But there's also the argument that running flat courses really only prepares you for running flat races, but running hills will prepare you for flat races and hilly races. So I much prefer the athlete to go tackle the hilly route and get less miles out of it because I know it's making them a stronger runner. And doing training plans in minutes, in my opinion and in my experience, encourages, I think, that kind of behavior because I'm not pushing them to hit a particular mileage. I'm just looking for just time on feet. I've also found that it's easier for time-crunched athletes to do training plans in minutes because they know how long they're going to be out there.
Right.
If I give an athlete a 10-mile run, that can take them anywhere from, 2 hours, 2 hours and 15 minutes, 2.5 hours. You never know, depending on what the environment is like and, how much stress they've been under, how much accumulated fatigue that they have.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good argument for like the time piece of it, because if you have someone that maybe they only have a certain time amount to run or time every day to run, then you have to kind of consider that. When we were making their training plan, they're like, "Oh, I only have 90 minutes on this day, or I only have an hour on this day." This is kind of the window. Like, I think having a time-based plan is nice because there is no pressure to be like 90 minutes. You should be able to get like, I don't know, 8 or 9 miles, in that time frame. But maybe they are struggling, or it is a different kind of route, or it is hot, and so they're not like stressed about it as much. Of
Yeah.
like, oh, I did 90. I only had 90 minutes and I didn't complete the distance I was supposed to do. And then I think that is a little frustrating, or maybe they're trying to finish, and then that's pushing their day off or something. They're stressing about this need to complete their mileage. So in that time frame, maybe they're pushing too hard too, I think. Then an athlete might be like, okay, I've got to complete this in 90 minutes, and it's prescribed at this mileage, and they might push harder than they should for that
Yeah.
run because maybe they're feeling fatigue. But the way I do personally training plans is like my recovery days, I'm kind of counting for that. Because the easier days, I might know that that person on their more easy day might run 9:30, maybe their easy days are like a 10-minute mile, like 9:30 to 10:30. So I'm kind of accounting for that, like in their training plan too. Like in training peaks for when I expect, like, let's just take me, for example, like on my recovery day, I might put 60 minutes and then put 6 miles in there. I know it's
Yeah.
probably going to be a little more than 6 miles, but if I'm really struggling, I can do 10-minute mile. You know what I mean? That's probably slow, like true recovery, but there have been times in my marathon training where it's pretty close to a 10-minute mile because I'm just really in that recovery mode and I can't go any faster. So that
Mhm.
on another day, I might do a 60 minutes and I put in there 7.5 or 7 miles because that day is a different goal. That day specifically, I'm running, maybe doing a progression run where I'm starting a little slow, but I know I'm ending fast.
Yeah.
And then if I'm starting that run and I don't feel good or something's happening, I think then either way, whether you're doing minutes, like, because you have prescribed runs, like every run is a prescribed something. Like it's either an easy run or like a fartlek or like a progression run or a tempo run. And you kind of have an idea of what that athlete's going to run, even if you're not like prescribing a very specific pace. So I think I'm doing that anyways. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like,
Yeah.
I know, okay, you have 90 minutes this run. I know it's gonna be like an interval style run. And so overall so I'm gonna kind of prescribe maybe a mileage I know that they can run. It's not gonna hopefully put them over. And if they're that struggling that much that their pace is that much significantly slower, then then something happened. Do you know, even
Yeah.
accounting for things like hills or, I mean, maybe it is hot and I just the mile that I prescribe is going to be less. Is that,
Yeah.
I'm just taking that into account, I guess, already. And so it's like, but I think I get what you're saying. I think if somebody's just doing a training plan based off of something they found online, that's different, right? I get what you're
Yeah.
saying. But I think I'm just trying to think
I
through how I
yeah.
go about this process, and I think the way I go about it is also actually thinking in minutes and not just mileage. Like, I
Yeah.
never put in Training Peaks usually just a mileage. It's always got minutes in there.
Mhm.
You have both sections you fill out, right?
But I don't think that that's a common occurrence if people get
Oh,
training
okay.
plans from online.
Oh, yeah, it just
It's
comes
it's
in
all prescribed
mileage.
in
Oh,
miles. So
interesting.
I
Okay.
think that the way that you do it is it's gonna make it better than if somebody just pulled
Right.
a training plan from online and it's all mileage based. There's no time in it, so they're
Right,
just
you're
out
right,
there
you're
and they're
right.
just
Yeah,
trying to
for
hit it.
that,
So
yeah. What
if
you're saying is making sense then, yeah,
yeah.
based off that.
So if I have a 60-minute run that's an endurance run, doing it in minutes allows me to accommodate athletes of various abilities and skills. So if I have a really good runner and I give that athlete a 60-minute run, they may get, 8, 9 miles out of it.
Mhm.
And they accumulate a particular level of adaptation from that run. But if I give another athlete who may be slower or newer to the sport and I give them a 60-minute run, then they're going to get maybe 6 miles, 5 miles. The adaptation that they generate for themselves is going to be pretty close to the adaptation that the better runner, quote unquote better runner, generated for themselves, because it's going to be relative. But if I would have given both runners an 8.5 mile run, what I would have done is I would have been spot on for the more experienced runner, but I would have over pushed the other one and could have opened them up to something else, a little bit more fatigue than what I would really want for them. It could jeopardize the quality of subsequent workouts. And so that's why I really do like these minute based, is because it allows me to normalize across abilities.
Abilities, right.
That more experienced runner can handle that kind of mileage because the body is still under stress just for 60 minutes. So again, the body doesn't differentiate between miles. It doesn't know. Oh, we've been under stress for 5 miles. No, it knows that it's been under stress for a particular number of minutes, and I think that
And then
that's one of the
yeah,
reasons why I push for this type
and
of training structure.
all of the other metrics would be similar, let me because the heart rate for that 8 or 9, the heart rates are maybe similar. Everything else, all the
Yep.
load and everything is gonna be similar. So
But
I agree, that's
it's not
why
a goal that I'm trying to get them to hit. That I think that's the difference, is that this is not a target that I'm trying to get you to hit.
I think planning a training plan with minutes could be very like I would encourage people listening, especially newer runners who maybe aren't experienced, because I think for someone that's experienced, like I'm kind of thinking for a runner who has been running for a while, and I'm trying to put their training plan together, and I'm like, okay, I want them to kind of do like a moderate distance run. For someone who's experienced, that might be like 12 or 14 miles, or their pace is a little fast,
Hmm.
quicker. Then a newer runner, like their moderate run might be 8 because I'm thinking like that, but it's not like I'm putting it so it's like it's just the way I'm been running for so long and but, it's like I'm thinking, but I know people want it in mileage, so I'm just doing it differently because I'm doing it for them. Does that make sense? Like
Yeah,
that
it
same
does.
scenario, that one runner, I'd give them a 5-mile run where, so I'm doing that intuitive, but I think, like
But
intuitively.
template plans don't
The
do that.
templates plans don't do that, so
Yeah,
you're right,
that's
and
the
I think
difference.
that's where I really think that it could be so even for someone like myself, or an experienced runner, to have that be a little bit, like, liberating almost, because I think there
Yeah.
is such a I know I fall into this just both anytime I've done a marathon, it's not so much not s it's just, like, the marathon specifically, I get so obsessive in a way about mileage. I know I do because I wanna hit I do wanna feel confident, and I do know that and then part of it is just this experimentation again of trying to get the fatigue and knowing that if I hit this certain mileage, that's kinda where I've been in the past. There's something about that very specifically, but I do think there'd be something liberating about just doing, "Okay, all I have to do today is an hour or an hour." You just like, regardless of the pace, if I feel good, I'll go faster. There is something, and I kind of have that in my plan, but not always. I do have a mileage I'm trying to hit too, right? So there might be something like I would encourage people listening to think about that. Like, how wouldn't it be kind of just like liberating to let go of mileage and that
Yeah.
instead look at hours? So just maybe your plan, you're trying to get to 10 hours a week of training at the peak for your marathon. And whatever that is, it is, but you're just looking at it based off of, then you're letting go a little bit and it's the same amount of load because like I said, maybe you're looking in Strava or in Training Peaks and you see for that mileage, that's about what you hit. So in terms of minutes or hours, but then you break that into a training plan and you just let that go. Whatever it could
Mhm.
be 72 miles, it could be 65. I
Yeah,
think that would
I
just be
agree.
so liberating personally.
Yeah.
I wish runners would consider that more because I think it makes a lot more sense in a lot of ways to do it minute based. And if I had, maybe in the future, like working with people, I would maybe be more inclined to suggest that. I'm open to doing it in mileage and I still kind of make adjustments based off of how long you're running. But would you be willing to consider this because it may make more sense and kind of explain
Yeah.
why about
It's
my
like trying to convince an athlete to not run with their watch. You
yeah.
know, it's liberating, but it's scary as heck. The just the
Well,
sheer thought of running without a watch really kind of freaks me out,
you know
because I'm
what?
a big
Like, and
data guy. But
I'm thinking about
yeah,
this, and I'm like, in high school, like, we didn't have Garmin. I
no,
don't
you
know
just
when Garmin
went.
came out, but how liberating I think it was just to be able to go for a run and be like, I don't know how we ran 30 minutes. I don't know. I have a Timex watch, but we didn't know how far. We did have like routes that we would do in high
Hmm.
school. Like, this is the 4 mile, this is this loop or whatever. We kind of knew how long it was, but we didn't know exactly how long it was to the T, and we just go run how we felt. And then, like, thinking back to those days, even in early in college before we really had Garmin, same thing. We had like certain routes that were a certain distance and we would just run. And I never always, in fact, many times I didn't know what my pace was. I had no idea. I really had
Yeah,
absolutely no idea. Like, I would just run. And I kind of like missed that, And I don't know. I guess the
yeah.
coach, I don't know how my college coach was. I mean, it was there was like discussions of mileage, but did anyone really know exactly how many miles they were running? Because like, we had the routes, but most of the time, none of us, I think, had Garmin's. I don't th that was that was, like, 2001 to 2006. I don't even know at the first one I had was, like, a giant thing on my wrist that was, like, a
Yeah,
huge
it's like a brick.
and you had to, like, plug it into your computer, so I'm like, "What?"
Yeah,
I think this obsession is really very recent, like, more obsessed, like, and people are so like obsessed about their watch. And what if we just, yeah, if we let go of mileage and just did it minutes, maybe you could just wear like an old Timex watch and run for an
yeah,
hour and just run because you actually like to run. Why do we have to know? Yeah, I agree with you. I think it sometimes takes the joy out of running, and I do think, to time it, to have to put it on people who are like constantly posting on Strava everything they do and like having to have it be something phenomenal or something like, like what
Right.
pressure is that? Like, are you really enjoying the sport? Like, I don't know. Maybe that is the enjoyment for them. That's one of the biggest, um, reasons why I struggle so hard with, like, I wanted to do more of the sharing of my experience with putting stuff on YouTube and videos, but when I go for a run, I just wanna run. I don't wanna worry
Yeah.
about whether somebody's taking a video of me running and if I'm gonna post it somewhere. Like, I guess I'm old school like that, like, 'cause I grew up in that era where we just went and ran to run and nobody knew I didn't have anywhere to post it. I would just go for a run in high school. Nobody other than me and maybe my teammates knew that I went for a run that
Mhm.
day. And now I post it on Strava, and everyone I follows me on Strava knows I went for a run. So I'm like, I don't know, like, but I don't care because I'm more of that old school, like, I just do it because I love running. And so I think part of me worries that if I share too much and all of a sudden it's like I'm videoing myself and I'm posting things and now there's like this pressure and there's people
You're
following
worried about
me.
feeding the machine?
Feeding the machine, yeah, I just
Yeah.
wanna run because I do genuinely love to run, and what if that
Mhm.
takes it away from me? What if I then it's like now I feel like especially if I were to become more if it were to actually make traction for which would be exciting, but at the same time, now I feel more stressed to have to, like, post more of that, and all of a sudden, maybe the running isn't so joyous anymore. I'm not doing any of this to make money. Oh, and
Right.
I don't necessarily know. It's like any passion once you start to do something and now that's some route to make money. Like I like coaching because I and yes, that's like a form of income, but that's different because you're doing it. I genuinely want to help people, but to
Mhm.
post like my running and somehow be like a run influencer or something, I just think it just takes all the joy out of it, for
I think so
me,
too. Yeah.
personally. So that's a different topic. It's like off topic. But going
Yeah.
back to that, like maybe like why can't we go back to just thinking of it in minutes and just going out there and running and not being so tied to what pace exactly and just kind of like, okay, it's 60 minutes. I'm going to go how I feel and RPE instead of so much focus on pace. And I think people would get more joy and maybe actually still make it to the finish line and do pretty good, right? Like, does that, like, I think people would maybe even do better because
Yeah,
you
I think
maybe
that there's
wouldn't
an
be so
argument to that
overtrained, right? You wouldn't be
yeah.
so overtrained, which I think so many people are, and I kind of run into that myself a little bit,
Yeah.
which makes me I've been thinking about how after this marathon, if I do another one or do how I'm going to do it just different, and how I can maybe do it in a way that is less mileage and maybe still yeah, I mean, maybe it would be minutes based and maybe it would be more certain elements that I would add in that would be a little bit non-traditional to see if I could get there and maybe taking all the mileage piece out and seeing
Yeah.
what could happen because it might be really interesting. But yeah, you might have to work with me on that. It
Sure.
reminds me, don't care about the mileage.
I
Anyway,
and I wanted to the last kind of like pro that I think
that
for
was like
this
a
one.
long off topic thing, so we
That's
can
all.
always
It's all
cut
good.
some of that out.
Is the way that I think of stress is there's a bucket, and we've talked about this before, like the bucket, and we've actually
Mhm.
alluded to I think it was. Did we talk about the bucket with stress and when it was
Yeah,
like to poke holes
I
in
think
it and
we
all that kind of
have,
stuff?
like, when you load you have all the
Yeah, so
stress
that's
and
the way
then
that I do think about training
right.
is there's a bucket of stress that we have. And if I'm working with a triathlete, there's no swim stress, there's no run stress, there's no bike stress, strength stress. It's just stress.
Mhm.
Now, doesn't mean that every mile you cycle is going to be equivalent to the stress is going to be equal to every mile that you run. I'm not saying that all stress is equivalent.
Equal, yeah.
What I'm saying is that the body doesn't differentiate between the source of stress.
Mhm.
Likewise, if you're the same goes for just everyday work life balance, that type of stress goes into the bucket as well. So since I think of stress that way, that is the one thing that I want to manage. And doing training plans in minutes allows me to do that better
Mhm.
than doing something in a distance based. Because let's say that I give an athlete let's say a 3 hour ride, and because that's what my rides have been lately for my training plan. I can get upwards of like around the half Ironman distance ride, so I'm right around like 56 to 58 miles on the bike. Now that type of stress is going to be very different than if I went out and said, okay, now we're going to do a 3 hour run, is going to be so much
Oh,
more
right, yeah.
demanding on the body.
Oh, yeah.
So if I say, well, now I'm not going to give you mileage, I just want to say, okay, now that we cycled 3 hours yesterday, I want to manage the stress that you still have, because there's no way that you've shed a significant amount of that. It doesn't matter what you do. You're still going into the next day a little bit depleted, a little bit sore. There's still going to be damage to the muscles, and it's still an inflammatory response that is still going on. So I want to manage the quality of that run given all that criteria that I have to keep in mind.
Mhm.
And doing things in minutes allows me to do, I think, a better job of managing that,
Mhm.
especially if I'm coaching athletes of various skills. It doesn't. I'm not saying that I just take one training plan and I just copy and paste it into some other athlete, because it's all going to be relative. Because there's more to it than just prescribing minutes. I have to worry about the recovery. Is that athlete able to manage those type of
Mhm.
minutes? Can they be under stress for that long,
Yeah,
regardless of what the distance
minute-wise,
is or
yeah.
what the minutes are? I want to be able to manage their ability to not just accomplish the workout, but to recover from it and be able to do what it is that we need to do the next day. And so just because I do training plans in minutes and it's all going to be relative doesn't mean that I would give those same athletes all the same minutes. So I wanted to make sure that that's clear. Previous example that I used of the two runners, where I gave them a 60-minute endurance run. The faster runner was able to get 8.5, 9 miles out of it, but the more inexperienced runner may have gotten only 6. They both ran 60 minutes. They still generated the same adaptation, physiologically. However, the stress is not the same. So, making that slower runner or the more experienced runner run for 60 minutes may have still pushed them over the
A little bit,
edge,
yeah.
even though I gave them what would be equivalent to a 8.5 mile run with a more experienced runner.
Mhm.
Is that, can that runner handle 60 minutes? I don't know.
Yeah.
Even though that's the level of
Yeah,
adaptation that
the
we would
less
want,
experienced one may
doesn't
only be able
matter.
to handle 45 or 50 even. Like,
Right.
you know what I mean? Yeah, so I think that's where the adjustments you're making as a coach would be important, obviously, because you're kind of looking at
Yeah.
each individual person. So you're not just like cookie cutter plan, like, oh, this is the same. Yeah, I get what you're saying. The other thing with mileage is the only time, even if I were working in minutes, like the only time there might be certain instances where I might prescribe like a mileage based workout or something would be maybe if it were like a race simulation or something like, oh no, like I wanted them to do like a time trial or but which you wouldn't do for like a marathon, but maybe it would be like I want you to do 2 mile time trial. I guess you could do that in minutes too, but just to kind of see where they're at and cap it, at 2 mile. Like there might be certain instances where even with a time based, I might do a certain mileage goal in that, but it wouldn't necessarily be the entire workout. I could see that, if you're doing like a
Yeah.
simulation of some sort or I want you to sort of do a mile or 2 mile time trial kind of thing to see where you're at, in your fitness. But yeah, I'm trying to think of exceptions of where maybe within a minutes based um workout, I would do mileage, just adjust it, or
Yeah.
have like a mileage a day where it was a little more focused. Because I do think there are probably instances even within, I mean, I almost wonder if, yeah, maybe sometimes there's like a bit of certain workouts where there would be some sort of mileage focus, even if you're focusing mostly on minutes. Like I don't know if it has to be exclusively one or the other, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
I
It's
think
not
the
like
only
you're
reason that I've done the same thing where I've given an athlete, even though my training plans are in minutes, I've given them a 5K time trial.
Mhm.
In which case, hey, this is what we're looking for. We're not looking for generating fitness to run a 5K. I'm looking to set benchmarks
Yeah,
in order to
benchmark.
set
Yeah, like a
zones. So
benchmark
there's a purpose
purpose. Yeah.
and a very specific reason for why I would give it to you in distance versus
Mhm.
just, this is just a normal run of the mill workout. And, so that would be the only reason that I would do something. And I've done that before
Mhm.
where I've given them,
Yeah.
hey, we're doing a 5K time trial because, I want to set some kind of pace expectations,
Yeah.
not necessarily to have presented to the athlete to try and hit those pace targets, but just so that I have an understanding on where they are.
Right, where their
And
fitness is.
if I tell them, hey, I want you running a zone 2 run, but I see a particular pace, and then I can look back, it's like, okay, where would this pace fall within like the zones that we have, and it winds
Yeah.
up being like this is zone 3 or zone 4, then I have to go back. It's like, look, what happened this day? You ran it a lot faster
Mhm.
than what I would expect you to run it. And based on the zones that we have, this is a little bit more of an overreach. What was going on? Were you just feeling great, or
Right.
were you time crunched and you just needed to get through the workout, so you ran it harder? So those are all the different questions that I would have to have. But I do say, like, one of the pitfalls on doing a minutes based training plan is this inability to. I don't want to say inability because that's a bad word. It's harder to estimate race specific volume
Mhm.
when you're doing it that way. But I do it for myself because I know, where it is that I think that I could hit. So I say, well, if I'm training for a half Ironman, I know that I can do the bike in about 3 hours. So I know that I want my peak bike volume to be anywhere between 4 to 4.5. And then I can just kind of work my way back. We've talked about this on previous episodes as well. But if I'm working with somebody new, or they're doing a race that they've never done before, that is where the challenge lies.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
okay. We then have to base their training plan based on the goals and expectations that they have for themselves. If they come in and they just say, I want to do this in X number of minutes, and that's what I want my race time to be, then I can kind of set the training plan that way. But without some kind of guidance like that, it has to be a little bit more free flow is the way that I would describe it. It's like I may give them a volume and I may not necessarily map out the whole training plan, because a lot of times what I'll do is I'll set the skeleton of the training plan. So I know what the progression is going to be and how we're going to grow each week's volume ahead of time before I give it to them. But if I'm working with somebody new or we're doing a new race, I may not be able to have that completed before training starts.
Mhm.
And so I may have to grow their progression almost week by week
Mhm.
and be more reactionary than proactive
Right.
when it
Yeah.
comes to growing their training plan. So that is a pitfall that, I'm doing my first half marathon and I'm going to do my training plan in minutes. Well, you really don't have any experience on what you think that you could do it in unless you go to some of these online calculators and you feed it in, hey, this is my 10K time. Can you predict what my half marathon time would be? The accuracy of those calculators are what they are. So, you know, buyer beware there. So,
I mean, I think if you're doing that, maybe doing like a 5K or 10K just to kind of see where your paces are for that. And then, yeah, you are maybe looking at some of those calculators and then looking at what your pace, because I do think like at some point you do have to kind of, even if you're doing it in minutes, like you still have to kind of look at pace a little bit to kind of see where someone's at. If they're like I want to run a 8 minute, half marathon, 8 minute per mile half marathon, but they struggle to run an 8 minute per mile, 10K, and you're their
yeah.
pace. You're like, well, I got, and that's not maybe going to be. So I think as a kind of looking at all of that, even in mileage base, but it's
But in that kind of scenario, what I would do is I'm not going to give them training sessions with doing that kind of pace. what I may do is say, okay, these are the runs that I want you to do, and I want you to do them in this rate of perceived exertion and effort level. And then I use the output to determine what their pace should be realistically. And say, if they come to me and they're just like, oh, I want to run this, in a 10-minute mile, but I'm seeing from their runs that even like the really, really good runs, that they're not in the neighborhood, they're not in the ballpark. And so it's my job as the coach to say, look, I know that you have this expectation or this goal in mind, but given what I'm seeing right now, going for that kind of goal is going to be a bit of an overreach for where you are right now. So usually when it comes to something like that and they have a performance goal, I usually encourage that with experienced athletes, somebody who's done that kind of race before, or they've been doing this for a while. Usually with new runners or new athletes, I try my best to kind of discourage performance related goals.
Right. Yeah.
And then just do like softer goals. It's like, okay, well, we don't have a pace goal, but maybe the goal is to run the whole thing without walking, or to use a run walk protocol, but stick with it throughout the whole race, which can be a little bit challenging sometimes as you get deeper into the race and the fatigue starts to accumulate. And they start to say, well, I could hold this 7-to-1 walk ratio at the beginning of the race, but can I hold it at the back half, which really matters more? Right. And now that 7-to-2, that 7-to-1 turns into a 6-to-2, 5-to-3. And so that may be the goal, something like that, rather than having I want to finish in this time. I want to make sure that they finish before the cutoff. But, that's how I would approach their training plan. Is I think I'm more reactionary than proactive, especially working with new athletes and saying, okay, I'm not too concerned about you hitting these miles because, we'll have to make that evaluation, as we get closer. I want to train you where you are, not where it is that you want to be or where you think that you should be. And I think sometimes mileage-based training plans really encourage that kind of behavior. Okay, are you at a place where you can handle 20 miles a week? I don't know, but let's start training. And if I give you a minutes based, then we'll see where that mileage falls. And it's like, okay, this is where we're at. We're not at a 20-mile week. We're at a 15-mile week. So then you can say, okay, well now if you want and you really want a training plan in miles, then we can make that switch and say, okay, now that I have some kind of evidence on where it is that you are and what you can handle, let's go with that. But we have to break this mentality of like, oh, we're doing increments of, miles. So if I'm working with a runner, we're not going to increase from like 8 to 9 miles or 8 to 10 miles. I mean, I may go from, okay, this run last week was 8 miles. This week it's 8.5 or 8.25 miles. This whole idea is like, we got to go in these clean increments, which a lot of training plans do. That are online, I think really pushes the athletes beyond where they are and encourages more rapid growth than what they can reasonably recover from. So that's why I like minutes, because it kind of breaks that mindset where, I'm just looking for just to run this number of hours or whatever. And the miles are what they are. And then we can evaluate where they're at.
Yeah. I think like I said, I do think there can be some freedom, because I do think sometimes when it's mileage based, yeah, people are very obsessive about it, and sometimes they'll go faster than they should, or they'll push harder than they should because they need to hit that mileage. Whereas if it's
Right.
minutes based and you're like, oh, I want this to be easy, they're just focusing on the minute.
Because you got the time crunch person who maybe had the plans to go out and run earlier, now didn't, and they're not willing to either cut the miles down based on the time that they have available to them. So they go out and they do the run harder than what is prescribed, and now that's going to affect subsequent workouts. And I'm not getting that adaptation and that recovery that I really want from them, or the accumulation of fatigue, because they're poor at time management.
Right. So many people yeah. I get that. Yeah. I think I don't know. I think we've covered this pretty well. I don't have anything really to add. I think like you said, it's like, no, we're not it's not like we came to some sort of necessarily like a conclusion of like one being better than the other. I think just kind of the reasoning for both. Although, like I said, I would encourage people to consider a minutes-based approach, especially if they feel as though they are rushing workout, trying to run, they're not taking their easy days easy or for whatever reason to hit a certain mileage because they're time crunched, or if they're so obsessive about mileage that they're injuring themselves because can't be flexible with it, and they're
Right.
not taking into account the load on their body because it's hot that week. If somebody can let go of that, might be quite freeing, and they would probably have better results because they're actually, like, considering the load a little bit more than the mileage. And so I do think for many runners, maybe moving that direction and going away from mileage, might be actually quite beneficial to do. So
Yeah.
I guess conclusion I have is just like, but neither one is maybe, although I think there's a lot of argument for minutes based approach, but there's a way to kind of make it work. Maybe there's something in the middle where you were looking at both and there's a consideration there, but we're not really trying to argue for one over the other. But I do think for certain types of runners, I do encourage a consideration in moving towards more minutes based.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of this conversation is that I didn't want to go into it with a concluding statement on, yes, we have now proven that minutes-based training plans are superior to miles-based. I think we've made a case for using both,
Mhm.
whether you have some kind of hybrid approach or evaluating which method is appropriate given where the athlete is in their journey and what their goals are. So I think that this has been a pretty well-rounded conversation. So if you dialed in today and you wanted to find out which one was better, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but
You're gonna have to
we've
make
made a
your own
case.
decision.
Yeah, we've made the case for using
Both,
one over
one or
the
the other,
other,
yeah.
and I hope that you've been able to take this information and evaluate how you want to think of your training, and then pick the method that works best for you. I think
Mhm.
that's the key point that we really wanted to drive home. It's not which method is superior, it's which one's superior for your particular needs and where you are. So I've really enjoyed this conversation. I've been going through the math in my head, and I think this is going to be episode 99.
Okay.
So
Yeah, I think
when
so.
it
That's what I was
publishes,
right. I
so
was thinking it
we
might be, but
we're going
that
to be one episode away from our 100th episode, and that's really awesome. I want to thank you guys for tuning in today. We really appreciate the support that you continue to show the podcast. If this episode has been helpful to you, or if you know somebody else who may be helped by this conversation that we've had, we hope that you will consider leaving a review and a comment, or share the episode with whoever you think it would benefit from. Those are greatly appreciated. Again, like we say every time, we don't monetize this podcast, so we don't have ads and sponsors, and we're not trying to sell you hemp mattresses and supplements. So any kind of a review and comment and sharing that you do is a great way to show support for the podcast, because it really does increase the exposure. This is the way that iTunes and Spotify and they all work. As you get more and more people that are tuning in, it really starts to increase the exposure. So we hope that you will consider doing that. Reviews are really, really quick. It doesn't take much to click on whatever number of stars you think it's worth and put a little bit of context to it. Say,
Mhm.
great episode, bad episode, whatever it is that you want to say. Those are greatly appreciated. So we thank you for that. We also have the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast group. It's a closed group on Facebook that we started from episode 1, effectively. And we've been trying to grow out this community in order to bring everyone together. So people who like the podcast and want to talk about more, they want to share experiences with other listeners, reach out directly to us. This is a great place for you to do that. We do push out a little bit of additional content in this area. So if you're looking for maybe some short reels or some blog posts that we've written, this is a great place to go for that content. So all you have to do is you just answer one simple question, then you agree to the group rules, and it lets you right on in, and let's grow out this community together. So we thank you guys. We are active coaches. So if you are looking for a coach, and not quite sure how to do your training plan, whether you should do miles or minutes, or if you're just interested in trying to maybe try something new. You're going for a new distance, or you're going for a new goal, and you don't necessarily know how to approach it, what's best for you. Or you're just tired of trying to come up with your own workouts and what's the best interval durations for me. So if you're wanting to try something a little different, we hope that you will consider one of us as your coach. You can go to fuel2run.com for Coach Katie. She is a registered sports dietitian, so she does dietetics for all sports. She's board certified. She also does run plans. So she is a run coach. I'm at tabularossaracing.com. There's tons of content that are on both of our websites. I do single sport and multi-sport training plans. Sorry, no dietetics on my side, but we have a network. So if you come to me and you want dietetics, you'll go right on over to Katie. We'll bring her right on in to the network.
We can both coach you that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But if you're interested and you just want to have a conversation, feel free to reach out to us. You can also reach out to us through the podcast website, which is going to be mentioned in the credits for this episode. But we'd love to talk to you. I also want to push out the YouTube channel. So if you've been listening to this, but you kind of want to switch over to YouTube, and you can actually watch the episode of us sitting down here talking.
I don't know.
That is also available to you. We do push out shorts and reels and things out there, but the full episode are out there on the channel, and you can leave reviews and comments there as well. So give that a listen to. I can't think of anything else, but I really want to thank you guys for joining us and for the support that you continue to show. And I've been your host, Coach Justin, along with Coach Katie, and this has been episode 99 of the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. And we'll see you all again next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
That wraps up today's episode of the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Endurance sports have a way of teaching us patience, humility, and resilience, lessons that carry far beyond the workout. Progress in endurance sports doesn't come from shortcuts. It comes from consistency, discipline, and doing the work when it's not glamorous. Wherever you are on your endurance journey, keep trusting the process and honoring the work you put in each day. If today's episode resonated, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone to help on their endurance journey. Don't forget to join the conversation on our social sites to help build and foster a community where we all learn and support one another. We'll be back with more stories and insights from Coach Justin and Katie. Until then, visit the podcast website at theenduranceathletejourney.buzzsprout.com for more episodes from the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Have questions or comments about the podcast? Feel free to send us an email at theenduranceathletejourney@gmail.com. For all things coaching, visit Coach Katie at fuel2run.com and Coach Justin at tabularossaracing.com. Again, thank you for listening to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast, and remember to find joy in the journey.